Masechet Nedarim, Daf Bet. Very exciting to start this Masechet. A few words of introduction. First of all, the commentaries. If you look at the Surat Hadaf in the Vilna, you'll see it looks somewhat different from usual. There is Rashi here, but in the place of Tosafot, we have the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim. And Tosafot instead is pushed all the way out to the edge. That's number one. Second of all, even though this says it's Rashi, actually already the Bet Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, the Chida, many others have pointed out that this is not authentically actually by Rashi. We don't know who wrote this commentary, so we usually just call it Hamifaresh, the one who explains it. That's already, the Bet Yosef calls it that. So that's very interesting. It's not clear if Rashi wrote a commentary on this. It seems he probably did, but we don't have it. And so we have the Mifaresh here instead. And because of that, the Ran has in fact replaced him. So when most people learn Masechet Nedarim, instead of going straight to the standard Rashi, the Ran has become the standard commentary. So this is the kind of primary commentary, and then we'll look at other ones afterwards. Okay, so that's number one interesting difference between this Masechet and many others. In addition, the Geonim themselves say that this Masechet Nedarim was not studied in the regular curriculum in the Geonic Yeshivot. Okay, that itself is interesting. And third is the terminology and style of the Talmud itself. Forget the commentaries. The actual Talmud uses different vocabulary, different style of questions and answers than other Masechtot. And this has already been pointed out by many people. Why is that? One proposal is that this Masechet was edited in a different yeshiva in Bavel than most other Masechtot of the Talmud Bavli. So this is really fascinating. We'll point out one example of a different terminology already on this very daf. Okay, so we're dealing with a very unique, very special Masechet in its form, but also its content is very interesting about Nedarim. So a couple of words about that. To make a vow, this is a very serious thing. Our words have meaning. The Torah says if you make a vow, you have to keep it. Here's the basic Torah law. It comes from Sefer B'Midbar, Chapter 30, Ish ki yidor neder ladonai, o hishaba shebu'ah. We'll talk about the difference between neder and shebu'ah. Le'esod isar al nafsho, lo yachel debaro kechol hayoseh mepiv ya'aseh. If he says such a formula to prohibit something to himself, his word should not be chol, should not be taken lightly, like secular, but rather they have great import, and everything he says that comes out of his mouth, one should fulfill. So just like there are commandments in the Torah that Hashem gives us, so too one can attach one's words and give them holiness, so that you can actually create a prohibition on oneself. So words are very significant, not to be taken lightly, especially when said in the different formula that we're going to talk about. Now, we'll talk about what the difference in Shivu'ah and Neder in the Talmud itself. Quick intro. Shivu'ah is generally a statement about myself, that I will exercise tomorrow, I will not go to the bar, whereas a neder is about an object. This piece of bread is prohibited to me. Okay, so it might end up being a very similar outcome if I say, I'm not going to eat this bread, or this bread is prohibited to me. Nevertheless, the focus of attention is different, and it can have consequences. But within neder, which is what we're going to focus on here, there are two types of neder. One is the sacrificial. If I see an animal, and I take this animal, I say, this animal will be a korban, then that becomes holy. I have to actually bring it to the Bet HaMikdash, and I'm going to have to sacrifice it. Or I could make any item, a korban or cherem. If it's not if it's not an animal that can be sacrificed, it means I'll have to donate the amount of money of that item to the Bet HaMikdash. So these are all temple-based nedarim. That is not what our Masechet is about. Those temple types of nedarim will be spoken about in Seder Kodashim, not here. Rather, we're talking about the second type of neder, which is prohibitive isur. I'm creating a personal prohibition. So if I say this bread is prohibited to me, or this bread is like a korban, I'm not actually making it a korban. I don't have to bring it to the Bet HaMikdash. It just means that I'm making a comparison. Just like a korban is prohibited to anyone, we're talking about before the blood is sprinkled. After you do the whole process, after you process and sacrifice the animal and sprinkle the blood, then depending on what type it is, the leftovers can be eaten by kohanim or can be eaten by everyone. So we're talking about sacrifices before the sprinkling of the blood are prohibited to everyone. So I'm saying that this bread will be like a korban in the sense as prohibited. It doesn't make it holy. It doesn't mean I have to bring it to the Bet HaMikdash. Just I can't eat it. Someone else can go ahead and eat it. Okay, so that's the type of neder that we're going to focus on. What is this doing in Seder Nashim? What does it have to do with women? Well, nothing specifically. The laws of the Nedarim apply equally to men and women. However, we did see already in Masechet Ketubot that there were often women that would make a lot of vows, and the men didn't like it, and they made a condition. Listen, I'm not going to marry you if you have a lot of vows. So this was already, we already saw that this is something that many people did, women and men, would not be careful with vows. The rabbis weren't happy with that. You shouldn't make vows all the time. But just like today, sometimes you find people that curse a lot, sailors, whatever. So to people then, so also people back then, anytime in business or when they're walking around, whatever, they keep swearing about different things. So this was a reality, and that was already reflected in Ketubot. Furthermore, there is one part of it that is specific to women, which is that a woman's nedarim can be undone, hafarat nedarim, annulled by her father when she's young or by her husband when she's married. The last chapter of Masechet Nedarim will be about that topic. So since there is an aspect of it that is special to women, so that's why this Masechet is here in Seder Nashim. All right, the opening Mishnah is going to talk about 3 different types of formulas for making a vow. One is just a regular neder, straightforward, and that can be done itself in 2 ways, either directly saying, this bread is prohibited to me. Okay, then it's prohibited. Or by association, if I say this bread is like a sacrifice, that is another way of doing it. Okay, so both of those are direct statements. But people often would not want to say a whole direct statement, to say like a korban. They don't want to say the word korban, and so people would come up with nicknames for these various words, so they wouldn't have to say the actual holy word. Kind of like today, if you don't want to say damn, you say darn. If you don't want to say hell, you say heck, right? And it's kind of, even though you want to say a strong word, a curse word, but it's too dangerous to say the actual word, and so we replace it. Even though we replace it, but the replacement has the same meaning as the original word, and therefore is also effective if you use that kind of kinui, that nickname, in a vow formula, then the vow still is still valid. And the third category is what's called a yad, or an abbreviation. I don't say the whole formula, this bread is prohibited to me. I just say this bread, right? Or if I eat this bread, and I don't say that it is prohibited. So that's called a yad, like a handle. Just like if I want to pick up a pot, I could pick up the handle and then the pot comes with it. So too, in certain cases, if I just say the part of a full formula, and it's obvious that that I mean the whole thing, that also will create a valid prohibition, an actual vow. All right, so those are the words of introduction. And now let's begin with the first Mishnah. Kol kinuye nedarim kindarim. Any nickname for a neder is like an actual neder, even if you don't say the actual thing. So the regular formula would be direct, or you say like a korban, but people didn't want to say korban, so they would say other things like konam, konach, konas. The Mishnah here does not say all these words. Later Mishnayot are going to elaborate on this. Now, that's true for nedarim. since we're talking about Nedarim, we're going to talk about other types of formulas, like V'chadamim kachadamim u'shvuot kishvuot unzirut kenzirut. A cherem is also a temple formula. This will be a cherem. It means it will be dedicated to the Bet HaMikdash, but it can also be used as making a personal prohibition. This is cherem to me, this bread. If I say that directly, that is a normal thing. If I say it indirectly, I say other words instead of cherem, like cherek, cheref. People didn't want to say cherem. If they substitute that, it also effectuates the vow. Now, a Shevuah is a different type, as we saw, is a obligation on the person, not on the thing. But a Shevuah also, people didn't always say that ani nishba, a Shevuah upon me, but they might say Shevuta, Shikuka, right? Other types of language, other language that they replace with it. This was a very popular thing to do. One interesting thing about this Masechet, a lot of it is actually not theoretical, unlike some other topics where the rabbis are coming up with theoretical cases to test out principles. Here, it seems that in real life, many people were making vows and they didn't want to say the actual word, and so they replaced it with all these kinds of nicknames. Okay, unzirut kenizirot. If someone says hareni nazir, that's the normal way to say I declare myself a nazir. But they might not want to say that word. They say nazik, naziach, paziach, right? All kinds of other words that became associated as synonyms for nazir. If someone says that I am a paziach, then he's also going to be a nazir. Okay, so far, the Mishnah, if you notice, did not actually give any examples. I was looking at the Rambam and his examples. The examples of the substitute words actually are going to come up in later Mishnayot or in Masechet Nazir for Nazir. But it just stated as a title, these any kinui is for Nedarim, is like Nedarim, and so too for these other categories of statements. Now, the next examples are not going to be examples of kinuyim, but rather examples of yadot, of the abbreviations. Ha'omer lechavero mudrani memecha, mufreshani memecha, meruchakani memecha, she'ani ochel lecha, she'ani toem lecha asur. Someone says, I am avowed from you. I'm separated from you. I'm distancing from you. Whatever I eat of yours, whatever I taste of yours. So he didn't say is prohibited, right? And so he didn't use any language of prohibition or like a korban or anything like that. But we know what he means, right? You can tell from the context. They get into a fight. He says, anything I eat from yours. And then ... is going to be prohibited to me like a korban. And so even if he only says the abbreviation, still it's prohibited. The Talmud is going to wonder, how come in the title of the Mishnah, it starts off with a title about substitute kinuyim, and only later in the next Mishnah, we're going to actually give examples of it. But in the title, it doesn't say anything about yad. And yet, in this very Mishnah, it gives examples of abbreviations, yad, but doesn't give any examples of kinui right here. So it seems to be a mismatch in starting off. The title is, here are kinuyim, and then give examples of yad. The Gemara will address that. Menudeh ani lecha, Rabbi Akiva haya chochech bazeh leachmir. Someone says, I am ostracized, menudeh, nidui, excommunicated from you. Now, he's not actually making an excommunication. You need a betin to officially excommunicate someone. But he's making a neder. It's as if I'm excommunicated from you. Everything you have is prohibited to me. A neder, by the way, you can go in two ways. I can say that this item that I own, you cannot benefit from, or I can say about anything in the world that it's prohibited to me. But I do have to have either I own the item, or it has to be that I'm the one that can't have it. So if I use this word, minudeh, you are excommunicated, I'm excommunicated to you. Is that it's not a normal way. So does that make a neder? Rabbi Akiva wasn't sure, but he said, maybe. And he said, in the end, he was stringent that yes, we are going to consider it as a vow. All right, that is the Mishnah. The opening sugya, like the opening sugya in many masechtot and even many perakim, is going to be very technical about the language and structure of the Mishnah. So this is probably a later sugya. In other words, we're not going to find names of Amoraim here. So this is from the Stamaim, from the editors of the Talmud, but it does serve as a kind of introduction to it. As we're going to see, this, even though it seems like it's talking about very technical language of the Mishnah, is actually using this question and answer in order to introduce some very basic concepts and sources about Nedarim. So the first question is, Kol kinuye nedarim kindarim, mai shena gabe nazir, de lo katani lehu lekulahu, or mai shena gabe nedarim de katani lekulahu. The Gemara is wondering, how come in Masechet Nazir, which is going to be the next Masechet we study, it says, you see a very similar opening, Kol kinuye nezirut kinzirut. Any substitute language of being a Nazir is the same as being a Nazir. And then it just goes on and gives other examples, Nazir, Nazik, Nazir, Paziach, right? These are all Nazir. So what you see is that this focuses only on Nazir. It doesn't bring in Neder, Shevuah, Cherem, right? So how come over there it focuses only on the one topic, and yet in our Mishnah it brings in lots of topics? So what's the reason? So how come in Nazir it does not mention other ones, and here in ours regarding Nedarim it also brings in these other categories of obligation? Mishum de neder ushbua ketibi gabe hadadeh tane tarten kevan de tane tarten tane lekulehu. So the reason is because in the pasuk that we learn neder from, it says hidor neder or hishaba shivua. So since in the very pasuk, the source, it brings neder and shivua, so we're going to bring those two together, and once we bring two of them, we're going to bring all the other types of languages of prohibition. Whereas Nazir, which is earlier, Perek Vav in Bemidbar, doesn't mention the others. So that's a self-contained unit. Okay, so since we mentioned two, we're going to mention all of them. Fine, but if primarily you want to bring, you brought Nedarim, and then you brought Shavuot because right next to it in the Pasuk, then in the Mishnah also, we should bring Nedarim, and then Shavuot right after. And then after they say, oh, we mentioned two of them, we'll mention the others. Why does it interrupt with Haramim? Should say Shavuot right away, immediately after Nedarim, and the answer is I did Tana Nedarim de mitzad hafsa ale, Tana Namacharamim de mitzad hafsa ale, La Poke Shivua de Kasa Nafshe min hafsa. This is a very important statement that since it mentioned Nedarim, where it's the actual object that becomes forbidden to me, I want to mention Cherem also, which effectuates the same thing. It's the object that is the location of the prohibition prohibited to me. And so those are conceptually more similar. Whereas a Shevuah is different because the Shevuah, I am putting the prohibition on myself. I am prohibited to this item. And so that's therefore, since conceptually it's more different, that's why we put it there. Okay, this is the main source here where we have the difference between Isur Hefsa and Gavra, which the Talmud does say explicitly here. It is a useful concept, and that's why later on, especially the Briskers, apply this to lots of different things to see in other cases which one it is. But the source of that distinction comes from right here. Okay, Patach b'kinuyin kol kinuye nedarim ofaresh yadot hamed l'chaver mudar ani memecha. So now we have a question about the structure of the Mishnah. In the title, it talks about kinui, substitutes. But then when it gives examples only of abbreviations. It doesn't have any examples yet in this Mishnah. That's going to come in later Mishnayot. Vetu yadot inshe. And furthermore, did they forget about the abbreviations in the title? Right? You should have said in the title, these are abbreviations. Yadot and kinuyim are like nedarim. And then give examples of each. So why is the yadot missing in the title? And how come the kinuyim are missing in the examples, at least the immediate examples right here? And the answer is Airi behon v'chasure mechasera v'achi ketani kol kenuye nedarim kindarim v'idot nedarim kindarim. No, it is talking about it. The Mishnah is dealing with it, and there's missing words in the Mishnah. Here's how you should read the Mishnah, as follows. All the kinuyim of nedarim are like nedarim, the substitute words, and the abbreviations also. So in other words, we're adding it in to the title. In fact, the title does say kinuyim and then yadot. This is an example, by the way, of some of the unusual vocabulary that's found in this masechet. This yadot inshe and then Airi Behon, normally we would expect in most other places, Masechtot, you'd expect the language Mandachar Shemeh, right? Who Yadot, Mandachar Shemeh. Who mentioned anything about Yadot? That all of a sudden you're saying something about Yadot. So you find that in other places, this Airi Behon is a different type of terminology. All right, so that's just one of many, many indications that this Masechet may have been from its source was edited by a different yeshiva in Bavel than others. Epstein thinks that this one is from Suda, and the other was other Masechtot were from other yeshivot. Okay, anyway, so the answer here is that, yes, in fact, we're going to fix the title, and the title's going to have kinuyim and then yadot as well. So now the question is, v'lifrosh kinuyim beresha. If it mentioned kinuyim first, and only then yadot in the Mishnah, so then it should give examples of kinuyim first, right? You go, in the title you have A and B, and then in the explanation you should have A and B. Like in, an essay, you say, I'm going to prove my point from A, B, and C, and then you have a paragraph about A, then B, then C. You should go in order. So how come you don't go in order? So the Gemara answers, actually lots of Mishnayot do not go in A-B order, but rather go in A-B-B-A order, a chiasm. For example, often the Mishnah, whatever it ended with, that's what it will start with. In a title, it'll say A-B, so it ended the title with B, and then it'll say, okay, now I'm going to give examples. I'll start with the thing I just ended on. So B-A. For example, we've got 3 examples of Mishnayot. Kiditnan. B'mei madikin, b'mei en madikin, en madikin. So the title is, what kinds of lamps can you use to light Shabbat candles, and what can you not use for lamps? And so since it mentioned en madikin second, so in the examples it starts with those items. That's an A-B-B-A structure. Or another Mishnah, Bame Tomnin, Bame En Tomnin, En Tomnin Vechule. On Shabbat, you are allowed to insulate food with regular insulation, but not with insulation that's going to add more heat to it. And there it's a A, B, then it starts with B, and only later it goes to A structure. What is a woman allowed to carry? Wear, out in public domain is not considered carrying, and what is she not allowed to wear? And then it goes on, it gives examples of what she's not allowed to wear. So you see, very often, it happens to be all these are from Masechet Shabbat, but okay, they're in the Mishnah, and so many examples where the Mishnah uses an A, B, B, A structure, and so too here, it'll say in the title, Kinuyim, and then Yadot, and then it'll start with Yadot and give examples of Yadot, and go on in the next Mishnah. It will talk about examples of kinuyim. So that's a fine answer. Here's the problem. There's a lot of other Mishnayot that do not use a chiasm, but rather have a regular A-B structure. And there actually seems to be, we had 3 examples of those. Here now we're going to quote 5 examples of Mishnayot that follow A-B structure. Is it true that any time it opens with A, it does not explain A first, but rather explains B first? It's not true. Regarding inheritance, there are some cases where a person who inherits also bequeaths, like a father and son, they inherit from each other. But some inherit but do not bequeath like a son and a mother. And then it goes and gives examples of the first one, nochalin umanchilin. So there's A-B structure. Or another example, yesh mutarot lebaalehen vasurot libemehen. Mutarot libemehen vasurot lebaalehen. Veru mutarot lebaalehen vasurot libamehen. In some cases, there's a woman who's permitted to her husband, even though she will be prohibited to the Yavama, like if they're all Kohanim, but the Yavam. The Yavam is a Kohen Gadol, and so even though she was permitted to the husband when he died, she's a widow, she is prohibited to the Kohen Gadol. Or the other way around, she may be prohibited to her husband if he's the Kohen Gadol, but when he dies, then she is permitted to the Yavam. So there are examples both ways, but it starts with A, B, and then it gives examples of A. Another example, yesh teunot shemen ulbona, shemen velo lebona, velo teunot shemen ulbona. Regarding menachot, meal offerings, some of them require oil and frankincense. Some of them require oil, but no frankincense. And here's the examples of those that require oil and frankincense. A-B structure. Another one. Yesh teunot hagasha ve'en teunot tenufa. Tenufa velo hagasha ve'elu tenuot hagasha. Also from menachot, some meal offerings require bringing them to the mizbeach, but they do not require waving them, right, up and down, back and forth. Whereas some require waving, but do not require bringing to the mizbeach. And then it says, and these are the ones that require hagasha, bring to the mizbeach. So A-B structure. Yesh bechol nachala ve'en bechol hakohen. Bechol hakohen ve'en bechol lenachala. Ve'ezehu bechol lenachala. And ze bechol lakohen. A final example, there are some who are firstborn for inheritance, but not a firstborn for that they have to give it to a Kohen for Pidyon Haben. If a firstborn is to the father, then that's how you decide inheritance is the firstborn to the father. But regarding Pidyon Haben, that goes by the mother, right? A mother is only going to have one firstborn that will be you have to do Pidyon Haben, which is actually quite interesting. Sometimes people say that Pidyon Haben is a once in a lifetime mitzvah. It's not actually true. It's once in a lifetime for a couple and for a woman, but a father, he can father one son if it's his wife's firstborn, and he has a second wife and it's also her firstborn, then he can have do Pidyon Haben twice. So anyway, the status of the firstborn for inheritance goes by the first of the father. The status of the firstborn for Pidyon Haben has to be the firstborn from the mother's womb. And then, so that goes A, B, Vezu bechol nachalav and bechol kohen, and then it goes back to A. So here we have a whole bunch of cases where it goes A, B. And so how come in our Mishnah we don't do the same thing and do kinuyim yadot and then explain kinuyim first? Okay, the answer is halen mishum davshule mefareshahu depatach beresha. That's going to give a general reason. All those first three examples where it goes A, B, B, A were very simple. B'meh madikin or b'meh en madikin. There was only one category to deal with, yes or no. In that case, it flows more smoothly to say it's very good. However, in these five examples, we had complex terms. You have what is a bechor for nachala, but not bechor kohen. So even this first phrase has two items, and then the other and more items. All of these examples were complex. Nochalin and manchilin, nochalin and not manchilin. So in those cases, because there's many terms in the yes and then the no, each of those clauses has multiple terms. So then they'll be confusing if you go in A, B, B order, right? Because it's too many things to keep in mind. So you want to say A, right? Bechol nachala and not bechol kohen. Got that. B is bechol kohen and bechol kohen. Okay, got that. So let me remind you again of the examples that we're about to bring, which is the bechol nachala and not bechol kohen. So in its complex terms, you have to go in A, B order is more clear. All right, so that seems like that rule would explain everything that we had above. But veha b'meh behema yosa b'meh ena yosa dela avsha V'katani yosa gamal. Hold on, we have an exception to this rule. Back to Masechet Shabbat. In what can an animal wear out when it's going out in public? And what can it not wear, because you're afraid that people will go and take it off and carry it. So that's a simple term, and yet it says Yotze Gamal. It goes A, B, even though there's only one term, and according to your rule, it should have been a chiastic structure. אלא לאו דווקא זימני מפרש ההוא דפתח בראשה, זימני נהו דסלק מפרש בראשה. Okay, after all that, we conclude that, you know what? There's no rule for it. Sometimes the Mishnah starts off, explains first that which with began, and sometimes it does the chiastic structure. What it last said, that's what it starts with. And it doesn't really matter. You could do it this way, you could do it that way, and both are just regular styles that are found in the Mishnah. And therefore, in our case, remember, our Mishnah actually only says kinuyim, but we said it's missing words. So with the added words, it says kinuyim yadot in the title, and then it goes A-B again, kinuyim yadot, and then it goes B-A in chiasm, and gives examples of yadot, and then later it'll give examples of kinuyim. So very good. This is a satisfactory answer. But if you want another one, yadot, or maybe it wanted to give examples of yadot, because how do we know that yadot work? It's from a rabbinic derivation of a pasuk. We're going to see the derivation tomorrow. But something that we derive from a rabbinic derivation is more beloved than something that is explicit in the Torah. Something explicit in Torah, okay, good. Everybody knows it certainly has more authority if it's explicit in Torah. That's true. But we want to kind of show off the rabbinic derivation, creativity. And so therefore, the rabbis like to put the one that's derived first, the examples of that. Okay, fine. That's why we explain the yadot first. Hold on. If that's the case, then why not in the title also mention yadot first? Because if it's beloved and you want to show the rabbinic innovation, so in the title do yadot and then kinuyim, and then the examples also do yadot and then kinuyim. How come in the title you would do the other way around? The answer is miftach patach bekinuyim deoraita beresha v'adan mefaresh yadot da'atyan le miderasha. Oh no! In the title, the Tana wanted to start off with the substitute words, with the nickname words, because that is in the Torah. Torah actually does not ever say that you can use substitute words, nicknames, but the point is that it's kind of obvious, right? If you're making a neder and you're saying ke korban, or you say another word that means the same thing, you don't even have, it's so obvious. It's like in the Torah itself. The Torah is talking about any word that you're actually saying that has that meaning. So it's not, the Torah doesn't ever say kinuyim are okay. Okay, but anyway, we're going to introduce something that's from the Torah itself first, and only then we will introduce the things that we derived from a derasha. The idea in this answer is that in the introduction of the title of the Mishnah, we want to talk about that which is in the Torah first, and not only that which is in Torah, also the one that we derived, the yadot, kinuyim yadot. But in the actual explanation of examples, the yadot are more beloved because these are from a derivation of the rabbis. So we'll do the examples from yadot first, and only then the examples from kinuyim. So that's the reason for that. It should be that it should be an A-B-B-A structure. A-B going from Torah to the Rabbanan, because you have to know Torah first, and then to say, oh, the Rabbanan is derived from. But the actual examples, we want to show off that which the rabbis have added, and only then go back to what the Torah said. All right, so that explains the Mishnah as reconstructed, because we had to add in the word yadot to it. But if you do that, kinuyim yadot that we added, and then yadot kinuyim, fine. Now we're going to relate this to another machloket that's coming up in a while. You see, by the way, how this opening sugya includes so much fundamental information. This machloket about where do kinuyim come from? Do they come from popular language or from the sages themselves. That's what we're going to see here. We quoted the Oraita. We quoted the pasuk where it comes from. We saw the difference, fundamental difference, conceptual difference between Nedarim and Shevuot. Right, every line back and forth here. We talk about in general the style of Mishnayot. So you see this one sugya, even though it looks like it's talking about very technical language. Why do you do this first, that second? Actually, is introducing major themes that will come up throughout the Masechet. Okay, so if you say Lashon Nochrim here doesn't mean non-Jews, but rather non-rabbis. These nicknames, did they come up spontaneously by people themselves? They never asked the rabbi. They didn't want to say the word korban, so they said kunam. And does it come from popular language? If so, then it's obvious that they would be effective. The reason why is because regarding Nedarim, when we want to analyze the language, what is that? What did he mean when he said, some ambiguous language? We go out in the street and we see how people are using language. The language of Nedarim goes by popular usage, because that's what people mean. It has to follow their intention. And so if it comes from the general street and this is how people are talking, then for sure nicknames will be valid. And then that would make sense to say nicknames first, because those are just basic fundamental Doraita, and only then we then talk about the Yadot that are from a Dirasha, and then examples of the Dirasha, and then the basic. Fine, that explanation is fine. But there's another opinion we're going to see later on, that these nicknames are actually created by the sages, so to keep people away from using God's name. If people are going to say this is going to be a korban la Hashem, and they say God's actual name, and then they misrepresent the formula, so we don't want them to do that. So it's the rabbis that introduced these formula, but they're not actually popular language. In that case, the kinuyim, like the yadot, are both rabbinic derivations, rabbinic innovations. And if that's the case, then this answer doesn't make sense, because this answer is predicated on the difference that you want to do deoraita, drabanan, as an introduction, and then give examples of drabanan, and then deoraita. Not that they're actually drabanan, they're derived from the Torah, right? So peshat, derived, and then the ones that are explicit, peshat, right? But if they're all the same level, then the answer before doesn't make sense. So, final answer, according to the one that says Lashon Chachamim, Mikatani Yadot. Actually, our Mishnah doesn't even say the word Yadot. We added it in, remember? Velav Chasure Kamechasat La. Didn't we say it was incomplete? We put it in. So, once you're putting it in, you can put it in anywhere. Akdem Nameh Utene Yadot. So, put it in first. And our reconstructed Mishnah can read as follows: Kol Yedot Nedarim Kindarim, Kol Kinuye Nedarim Kindarim. All abbreviations of Nedarim are like Nedarim, and all nicknames of Nedarim are also like Nedarim. Ve'eluhen Yadot Hameh Lechavero, Ve'eluhen Kinuyim Konam Konach Konas. And so then it goes in A-B structure. First it gives Yadot and then Nedarim, and then it'll give examples. And these are the Yadot. Someone who says to his friend, everything, all your food, anything I eat from you. And then it'll give examples of kinuyim afterwards. And so we can come full circle and say, really, we could have put it in the beginning. What you see from here is that the fact that we added it in before, right, the whole question that we were dealing with the entire daf was really not such a question, because the rabbis put in the word yadot into the Mishnah, and so if you had a problem with the order, you could have easily put it first, and so you could have just answered this to begin with. What you see is that the questions and answers here are not for the goal of, we really had this question, we couldn't figure out an answer, but rather it's going through the exercise, because by going through the exercise, we get to pick out a lot of these fundamental principles along the way, differences between the yadot and kinuyim, their derivation. Do they come from the language of rabbis or the people, the pesukim, and so on? Last point: this machloket, which we will talk about later on, does it come from the people or from the rabbis? These other nicknames. This was written about by Professor Saul Lieberman. And he shows lots of examples examples, even from non-Jewish sources. Greek people used to make vows, and the languages that the Jews and the Talmud quotes as Jews is using has interesting parallels to language, to the types of formulas that the pagans also used when they had their language. In other words, the people are in the streets and they hear their neighbors saying things in Greek, and then they are, just like language influences people, so too the common usage of language certainly is influenced by people's surroundings. Therefore, Lieberman concludes that all of these various nicknames and formulas that we're going to see were in actual usage by the people that they came up with. They didn't want to use the holy words, and so even though they wanted to make a vow, so they came up with all of these other words, just like, in English or any other language, pretty much any curse word, you can find that there are variations of it. Nevertheless, the rabbis came and tried to legislate regarding them and say, well, there's lots of different formulas people are using. Which of them are valid and which of them are not valid? So it is actually a combination of the community, regular masses of people doing one thing, and then the rabbis trying to legislate, well, what's the consequences if you say this, if you say that? When is it a valid vow, and when is it not? Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.